Hey guys, just a word of warning before I start this review. This is going to contain major spoilers to Iron Man 3, and maybe even a few spoilers towards the first two Iron Man films, and also the Avengers as well. So if you haven't seen Iron Man 3, I would recommend you just simply not watch this review. But if you're in kind of like two minds about, you're not sure whether or not you want to go and see this film or not, I would suggest that you skip to the last minute of this review, just to hear some sort of overall spoiler-free thoughts on the film that I give, and then a final rating at the end of that. Okay, with that said guys, let's start this review. So, Iron Man 3, the first of the sort of tie-in Avengers films to come out since the Avengers. This is sort of starting the second phase, I guess, even though this is actually the third Iron Man film. They basically just made Iron Man 2 because the production on Thor, I believe, was running a bit slow, so they needed something to hold us over. Major step up here with Iron Man 3 in terms of, certainly what was at stake for a start, and also, kind of the internal sort of turmoil that Tony Stark is going through. It's a much more interesting dilemma, I think, in this film, because it's sort of the idea of he's becoming too dependent on the suit, whereas in the previous film it was more just a case of him trying to stay alive, basically, which isn't really sort of turmoil or anything. It's just basic sort of mandatory in order to be able to live. I might die, I better sort that out, sort of thing. There's no real dilemma there. It's not anything you're going to learn anything from. It wasn't overly interesting. It was kind of interesting to watch while it was going on, but nothing really comes of it other than now he can stay alive, I suppose. But here, it is kind of more of a moral sort of turmoil. He's thinking that he's becoming too dependent on the suit. Perhaps that's why in this film, actually, the suit is actually not quite as effective as it was in the previous two films. It gets blown to bits quite a few times, all the sort of different suits there are. But yeah, certainly much bigger stakes. A much more sort of, invincible kind of villain in this film. The previous two, they've just been sort of guys in big Iron Man suits against Iron Man, basically, and it's just a case of whose suit is better. Whereas this guy is actually, his ability as, an actual person without a suit is actually what makes him threatening. And almost, that was a lot more interesting, a much more interesting kind of stakes from the previous two films. Just for the record, I actually thought the first Iron Man had its moments, but the ending kind of annoyed me. It didn't feel like anything had really been accomplished other than just he had succeeded at being Iron Man. And the second one was just sort of more of the same with hardly any action. I kind of enjoyed the first two, but it felt to me like something was lacking. It didn't feel like something was lacking in these. They've sort of upgraded the suit, even though it's actually sort of being blown apart and shattered to bits quite a few times in this film. But, they've upgraded what it can do. It has sort of a mind of its own now. It can operate without Stark actually being in the suit. It can sort of fly across the room onto him. He can sort of signal it, like a dog or something. And when they were introducing that, they were establishing that at the start of the film, I was sort of thinking, well, how's that going to become useful? Why does he need that? He has the suit on him the whole time, doesn't he? But no, as it turns out in this film, I guess, in sort of James Bond style, he kind of knew the scenarios that were going to arise during the film. It actually does become pretty useful to him a couple of times in this film, and it also gives him the ability to put it on other people should they need it. And they expand, the roles that Pepper Potts and Rhodey get to play in this outside of the suits as well. It did seem to me in the previous two films, at least one of them was in a suit when they were talking to each other, whereas in this, they're talking man to man, as pals, basically. So that was a lot more interesting, and it seemed like they were on much more of a level playing field now, whereas in the past, Rhodey has just been sort of Stark's sidekicks, and here it seemed much like they were partners rather than, Rhodey just following Stark's lead. And that's perhaps because, Stark is spending much less time in the suit in this film. I know, maybe some fans might be annoyed about that. It's called Iron Man. I expect to see Iron Man in an Iron Man film, but, we've had two previous films where he's done a decent amount as Iron Man. I think, he's done everything he can do as Iron Man, and here he's doing it much more as Stark. I definitely enjoyed that, and he gets quite a lot to do in the Iron Man suit in the sort of climax, the big action scene. You can tell this was really sort of something that they've been building up in all three of these films, to this ultimate kind of climax where just everything gets fucked up. It reminds me actually of the Terminator action scenes where just absolutely everything gets fucked about, and everything gets blown up, and to hell with the consequences of the damage they've inflicted on major buildings. It's a classic kind of action scene. It's just about defeating the villain, and we'll clean up the mess afterwards, kind of thing. Definitely reminded me of Terminator 2 in that sense. The previous two Iron Man films have had sort of decent comedy, I thought. There's some very sort of tight and very good sort of back and forth banter in those films. That's one of the few things I found really enjoyable about Iron Man 2, actually. It's actually not quite as good, I don't think, in this film. I'm laughing a lot less when I was watching this. Not quite such tightly written dialogue, and it's not as good, I don't think. I laughed a few times, but no, for the most part, it just fell flat for me. Robert Downey Jr. still delivering his dialogue absolutely brilliantly. I think, if I just see that Robbie Downey Jr. is in a film now, I will go and see it just for that reason alone. He is just that good. Unfortunately, I think maybe he and Rhodey in particular sort of steal a lot of the screen time away from a lot of other characters. There are quite a lot of characters in this film, and I feel a lot of them are kind of wasted. There's that English woman who's sort of the accomplice to the main antagonist, Rebecca Hall. Didn't feel like she really had a huge amount to do for the most part, and she gets killed sort of 2/3 of the way through. I didn't really feel like she added anything. And I also feel that even though there is a kind of idea to this film that, maybe Stark is too dependent on the suit, I also feel like he becomes very dependent on Jarvis throughout large parts of this film. He's reliant on Jarvis to do things for him and tell him things in order to, to be able to progress through the mission that he's doing, and I don't like that. I like the main protagonist, to be able to hold his own and not have to sort of turn to somebody else, for help or advice and everything. And certainly with the technology that he uses in these Iron Man films, it becomes a bit ridiculous. It's obviously, far more advanced than anything that exists in reality. And I don't want to think, he's becoming dependent on technology that doesn't actually exist. And I kind of felt like that was the case here. I thought, him constantly being in contact with Jarvis and constantly having to ask him to do things and tell him things, it became a bit ridiculous. There's also this theme throughout the film that he's still rather traumatized by the events in New York. I can kind of understand why that is, because he spent a decent amount of time in the vacuum of space and was only saved at the last minute by Bruce Banner. That could be pretty traumatic. Although he wasn't showing any signs in the actual film that happened in, that he was traumatized by the events of New York. He has maybe just had some time to think about it or something, I don't know. But it never goes anywhere. Nothing ever comes of it. He just sort of is traumatized by it, and that's it. That's the end of it. Nothing gets said of it by the end of the film. I also feel like they've, with the climax, well, not quite the climax of the film, actually, it's sort of midway through the film kind of thing, where they hijack Rhodey's suit, the sort of rip-off of Captain America's suit. There was a name they gave for it, but I can't remember what it was. It was War Machine, and then they changed it to something else. It gets hijacked by the terrorist organisation, and obviously they use that as a sort of a way to sneak in and terrorise everything. They sort of did that in the previous film, though. Rhodey's actually in the suit when that happens. He gets taken over at the end of the film, and he goes around terrorising everything that's going on. So I kind of feel like they're sort of recycling ideas from the previous film there. There's also a prologue sequence, obviously, that goes back to New Year's Eve on 99. I'm not quite sure why they set it then, where he meets the woman who would end up being the accomplice to the main antagonist, and explaining the origins of this new technology where he can heal instantly, where that arises from. Obviously, it's important exposition. It is something we need to know. I kind of feel like they would have been better off having that as a flashback when it actually became relevant in the film, rather than just telling it right up front at the start of the film, really, because what actually happens in that flashback doesn't actually become relevant until a little bit later. So it was a little bit confusing. He also has quite a few suits in this film, and they all get smashed to pieces pretty quickly. It becomes a bit ridiculous, really, when they've sort of established this suit as being pretty much invincible to anybody who isn't wearing a similar kind of suit. I don't know, it became a bit ridiculous just how easily they just fell apart into pieces like that. I don't know, maybe the previous suits, weren't designed to come apart like this one is, because they weren't designed to fly across through the air over quite a few miles in order to get to him. Actually, I kind of wonder, I don't think they mentioned it in this film. I wonder if he's got that idea from Thor's hammer, actually, because obviously Thor can do that that sort of telekinesis thing of just calling for his hammer at any given moment. I wonder if maybe that's where he got the idea. They don't actually mention that in the film, I don't think, but that would be a good, interesting kind of little thing to maybe just establish. Perhaps in the upcoming Thor film, they could say that, yeah, Stark stole my idea, you could say, or something like that. Generally speaking, I thought the cast were very good. Obviously, I've said Robert Downey Jr., absolutely fantastic, as he always is, in pretty much everything he's in. I kind of wish, though, that Don Cheadle had a bit more dialogue, though. I do enjoy him a bit more, and I would love to have seen a bit more of Rebecca Hall. Again, her character is kind of wasted, like I said. I don't really feel like she was given enough to do, and I think maybe this film suffers a little bit from having too many characters. I like the decoy terrorist guy, portrayed as the typical sort of Middle Eastern Asian Osama bin Laden, Saddam Hussein type character who is sort of like a real life terrorist, and he turns out to just be a decoy. I like that idea. That was quite good. I like the actor who played him as well. It's quite a well-known British actor who's Ben Kingsley. That was it. I can't recall too many bad performances here. People say they get annoyed by Gwyneth Paltrow in these films. I've never really disliked Gwyneth Paltrow in anything she's been in. I think she's a good actress. And the ending sort of seems to be giving the idea that this is the end of the series. I mean, obviously, I'm guessing Iron Man is going to have to come back for the Avengers sequel. I mean, surely that's going to get a sequel, isn't it? So this can't possibly be the end of Iron Man, but this maybe is the end of just the Iron Man trilogy. Or perhaps they're just sort of teasing us and making us think that this is the end of the Iron Man series, and it actually isn't. It sort of had the tone of sort of trying to wrap up the series, but at the same time there was sort of a slight hint of they were setting things up for a sequel at the same time, if that makes any sense. They were wrapping things up, but also setting things up for a sequel. I don't know how it's possible that you can do both of those things at the same time, but it did sort of seem like that to me. It seemed like they were just sort of saying, the suit may be gone, but Iron Man lives on, kind of idea. They're sort of saying, this is the end of it, but it's also, I don't know, is there going to be an Iron Man 4? Probably not, but I think he is probably going to come back to do another Avengers film. So anyway, yeah, that was Iron Man 3. Massive step up in the action. A lot more interesting ideas about how he's become too dependent on the suit, perhaps. And a much more threatening villain than the previous times I saw. It does sort of kind of, though, fall into the category of a dumb action film again. There's nothing massively deep or anything of massive substance in here. And the action isn't anything like as good as in the Avengers. It's good in parts, but it's still not absolutely outstanding, some of the best action I've ever seen or anything like that. So, it's probably just a sort of a 7, maybe a 7.5 kind of film. It's not outstanding in any kind of way. There's nothing about this that says, oh wow, this is the greatest thing I've ever seen or anything, but it's solid enough and decent enough. So, yeah, absolutely. If you are a fan of superhero films, if you're a fan of action films, and certainly if you in any way liked the first 2 Iron Man films, you will definitely like this. Okay, so that's that, guys. I will see you again soon. Bye.